Hi, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case. And I just need to give you a trigger warning. This case involves child abuse resulting in the child's death. So if this is something which triggers you, by all means, you can leave the video now, and I'll see you in my next one. Elsie didn't have the best start in life, but it soon seemed that her life will change for the better when Matthew and his husband Craig decided to adopt her. They were a couple madly in love with each other and desperately wanted children to complete their family. So they went down the route of adoption. They were looking for a baby so they can witness all the milestones, the first steps, the first words, and what their child would become growing up. It seemed like the perfect match. Elsie was looking for a loving home, and Matthew and Craig had love and a home to offer. To the outside world, Matthew was a proud and loving dad. But behind closed doors, something sinister would be happening. 2,999 calls in the space of 6 months, and the second cost Elsie her life. Now let's get into everything that happened. Elsie was born as Shayla O'Brien on 17th of November 2014, 1 week after her due date. She was born a healthy baby and she had an average weight and size. Just days after being born, she was taken into care by the mayor of Glamorgan Council because her mother had used drugs throughout her pregnancy. There were initial concerns that Elsie may have contracted hepatitis C from her birth mother, which meant that she had to undergo months of testing, but she was eventually found to be infection-free. Her father was never identified. Her maternal grandmother, Shan O'Brien, accepted that at the time of giving birth, her daughter was living a chaotic lifestyle and couldn't care for the baby, but Shan had wanted to look after the baby and give her a loving home, but she was deemed as not suitable. The family continued to have contact with Elsie whilst she was in the care of the foster family, and in January 2015, Shan started proceedings in the family court to become her legal guardian. The grandmother wanted to bring Elsie up in a happy, healthy and warm family environment, but social services and the family court decided she would not be able to cope. Despite this decision and Elsie being in foster care, as a family they were still able to have weekly contact with Elsie and they saw her at every opportunity. Then, in August 2015, out of nowhere, they were told by social services they had to go and see Elsie as soon as possible and say goodbye for the final time, as a suitable adoptive family had been found for her. This was completely devastating for Shan and the whole family. Elsie was a happy, healthy little girl, always with a smile on her face. She loved to get attention and she liked interacting with people and other children. Matthew Hicks was born in Cornwall, where he lived with his parents and his older sister until he turned 16 years old. The Hicks family were described as the kind of people who created a community. Matthew was born into and grew up in a loving family. He attended the local school near the village of Delabole and left with 10 GCSEs. He then went on to college, but he soon left and decided to get a job instead. Matthew was helpful and loving to friends and family. He was extremely dedicated to his family. He was a loyal friend and he was also honest. Matthew worked in a restaurant for a while before he moved to Swindon, Wiltshire in December 2002. The next year, in 2003, he got a job at the town's Oasis Leisure Centre, where he worked his way up from assistant to poolside lifeguard and finally to operations manager. He left the leisure center in 2011. In 2006, he met Craig Scully, who was 5 years older than him while living in Swindon. Craig had a nightclub there at the time. They began a relationship in 2008, and 2 years later, in late 2010, they moved to Cardiff, where Craig had a large family. After selling their house in Swindon in 2009, the couple lived in a caravan for 4 months in Oxford, staying with friends when it became too cold in the winter. They then purchased a 3-bedroom property in Wellwright Road in Fairwater, Cardiff, for about £150,000 in September 2010. Matthew remained living with a friend until finishing his job at the leisure center, moving full-time to live with Craig in February 2011. Matthew worked a number of jobs. He was a customer service advisor for British Gas, then a sales negotiator for estate agents Peter Allen, and then for services company Working Links. He also taught fitness classes at a gym part-time. Very soon the couple started making wedding plans and they eventually got married in Portugal in 2012. Early on in their relationship they talked about having children. They both sat down and talked about their life goals, what they wanted for the future, and they both agreed they wanted to have children. They didn't mind whether it would be a girl or a boy, but they decided they wanted a child as young as possible so they can witness as much as they could, from the first step to the first word and beyond. After their marriage, they had already decided they would like to have children through adoption. It was decided that Matthew, nicknamed by Craig Safety Boy, would give up his full-time work for them to have a child, so he could look after the child whilst Craig would work to handle the finances. Matthew had experience of children through family members and he was involved in the crèche when he worked at the Oasis Leisure Centre in Swindon. Vivian Cowney, a colleague of Matthew's from Working Links from 2012, continued to see Matthew as he was an instructor at the gym she went to. She was not surprised Matthew decided to adopt, as he himself experienced a loving home. Elsie's elder sibling, C, was placed with the couple as a baby, and Matthew Scully-Hicks gave up full-time work to become primary carer, with Craig Scully-Hicks playing a significant role as well. Craig's job required him to work away from home for 2 to 3 nights per week in Leicester, I believe, and he was never present when Elsie suffered injuries. The couple applied to become adopters. Craig hoped to adopt a daddy's little princess, so in September 2015 they welcomed 18-month-old Elsie in the family, which already had another adoptive child. C, we only know C by the initial, had been placed with the couple as a baby. She was already settled into the home, well settled into a routine and well loved. 6 months later, the new family moved to a £400,000 four-bedroom property in the upmarket part of Cardiff, suburb of Llandaff. They looked the very model of a modern, happy family. Matthew and Craig Scully-Hicks and their lively daughter Elsie, an infant given the chance of a new life through adoption. Neighbors, friends and colleagues spoke warmly of them. Craig went to work while Matthew looked after their princess. Elsie was great, apart from around meal times and bedtime. She was physically tiny and delicate, but had a brash and bouncy personality. A health visitor described her as a very happy, smiley child and said she was loving life. She was lovely, smiles all round. Vivian saw Matthew as a very proud father, a caring and loving father who would do anything for his child. When she would see him with his daughter, he was calm and caring. She never saw him angry and she was quite impressed with his patience. He would discipline Elsie by giving her time out. Craig said that his husband was a devoted and loving father, with the couple taking decisions about Elsie's care together. His house was filled with love and happiness all the time. Matthew and Craig had completed the rigorous adoption process without a problem and without any concerns being raised. They looked like they could give Elsie the new start that she needed. The couple received regular visits from staff during the adoption process. Health visitors would later call, as they do with any new family, and medical staff would see Elsie at hospital. Matthew and Craig formally adopted Elsie on May 12, 2016. Now, it sounds all perfect, pink, rainbows and unicorns, right? But there was something sinister and sad going on. Unable to cope with the demands of parenthood, 32-year-old Matthew Scully-Hicks was physically abusing Elsie under the noses of professionals, family, friends, even his own husband. The painful reality is that the abuse of little Elsie was hidden in plain sight. By the time Elsie arrived in their home, Matthew had already established a routine with Elsie's adoptive sibling. Matthew expected Elsie to fit into that same routine. Text messages in September and October 2015 indicated that during that period Elsie's sleeping was an issue, as was her crying. In those text messages, Matthew referred to mealtimes and bedtimes as his worst nightmare. Elsie would be crying and screaming. In more than one text message, Matthew described Elsie as having a diva strop. He referred to her in strong and derogatory language. These texts were at the start of Elsie's placement in their home, capturing a difficult period as Matthew and Craig were trying to adjust to the arrival of a young child with her own character and personality. Matthew became quite frustrated at what he said to be Elsie's attitude, her crying and her tantrums. To the outside world and those who saw him regularly, be it healthcare professionals, social workers, or friends and family, Matthew looked like a loving and caring father. But Matthew struggled when he was alone with Elsie or with her and her adoptive sibling. Although he denied not being able to cope with two children, text messages show otherwise. On 5th of November 2015, according to Matthew, Elsie accidentally fell when she was at an activity table in the kitchen. Only Elsie and Matthew were in the house at the time. As a result of that fall, it is now known that Elsie sustained fractures of the tibia and femur of her right leg. Matthew told his husband Craig and the doctors who saw Elsie that it was an accidental fall. Within days, Elsie couldn't bear her weight on her right leg. After conversations with Craig and his family, Matthew took Elsie to her GP, who then referred her to the orthopedic trauma clinic at the University Hospital of Wales. Elsie's pelvis and legs were x-rayed. The doctor who viewed the x-rays identified only one fracture, that of the tibia. He missed the second fracture. If the doctor wouldn't miss the second fracture, hospital protocol would have required him to show the x-ray to a consultant. Dr. Nia John, a consultant community pediatrician at the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, who has a safeguarding children role, said that if the existence of both fractures would have been detected, the management would have been different. A child protection medical would have been carried out. Dr. Nia would have sought further professional advice. Unfortunately, the opportunity was missed. The fall that Matthew described couldn't have resulted in two separate fractures, each with its own mechanism, in a child of Elsie's age. Those two fractures were not the result of an accidental fall as described by Matthew. These injuries were inflicted. They were caused by Matthew's frustration with and anger towards Elsie, whose crying and behavior didn't really fit with the routine he had already established. In December 2015, it was the first time that Matthew's next-door neighbor first heard a baby crying. The neighbor would hear Matthew saying "shut up," which he repeated quite a few times, sometimes using swear words when telling the baby to shut up. The neighbor got the impression that Matthew was angry and frustrated because the child was crying. The crying continued up until they moved from the house in Wellwright Road in April 2016. Another neighbor in the same house described Matthew's voice as sounding like a controlled tantrum. It was associated with the baby crying. Between February and April 2016, the other neighbor heard the baby crying and the person, who was Matthew, saying "shut up, you little effing brat." The next time the neighbor heard the baby crying, he heard Matthew say "shut up, you silly little cunt." Another neighbor heard him shouting in a similar manner. This showed that Matthew was frustrated and angry at Elsie for crying, and he couldn't handle the crying. Within 10 days of moving into the new house, Elsie appeared to have developed the beginnings of a squint in her left eye, which could also be attributed to in non-accidental trauma in a baby. Matthew was concerned about this, and Elsie was taken to the doctor, who saw the toddler to be a normal, happy child. On 16th of December 2015, Elsie had a large bruise on her forehead. Another bruise in the same spot was noticed in January 2016, and the fall down the stairs on 10th of March 2016 resulted in bruise-type injuries to Elsie. It was only after the fall in March that Matthew decided to seek medical treatment. He told professionals that the bruise in December happened when Elsie was at her play kitchen. She pulled herself up to a standing position using the handles. The door opened as the magnet in the door gave way. Elsie lost her balance and hit her head on the worktop of the play kitchen. But the doors of that play kitchen open with the tiniest pressure, and if Elsie would have pulled herself up using one handle, the door would have opened outwards towards Elsie. Elsie wouldn't have fallen forwards as the door opened. She would have fallen backwards, and she would not have struck her head on the worktop of the kitchen. When the health visitor saw Matthew and Elsie after the bruising to her forehead, he told her that he sought medical treatment for Elsie, but no medical treatment was obtained for Elsie in respect of the bruise. The bruise which Elsie sustained on 16th of December 2015 was caused by Matthew. It was not an accident. The injury happened at the same time as an adoption review, and Elsie was seen by her social worker, an adoption social worker, and an independent reviewing officer, but the presence of the bruise was not recorded. This bruise was visible for 8 weeks, yet it hasn't been recorded, and the adoption board was not notified of it. All in all, Elsie was seen 15 times by social workers. By January 18, Elsie had another bruise on her face, which again went unchecked by medics. As for the fall down the stairs on 10th of March 2016, Matthew said that Elsie was pulling herself up on the top stair gate, which had a faulty catch. The gate opened and Elsie fell down the stairs. Matthew's husband Craig did say there was a problem with this gate. The catch didn't easily fit. Matthew did call for help on this occasion. He rang 999 and said that his daughter had fallen down the stairs at their home. He told the call handler that she had vomited a number of times and was unresponsive.